Returning to the grind after Christmas is always a bit grim, but getting to grips with a brand new spaceship spec GT3RS, as well as some suitably high performance Swiss cleaning products certainly isn't. So join me for the first official car cleaning guru video of the year to hopefully banish what remains of the January blues.
So when you get word there's a new car of this calibre on the block, the only thing to realistically do is beg the owner for first official wash rights. But with this subtly specced ice grey metallic beast being owned by Roger Bailey, whose previous shark blue GT3 I treated to an initial clean a few years back, thankfully didn't have much begging to do. Now, while it had only been out for a few quick spins since its Christmas collection, the combination of wet wintry roads, wide sticky tyres and big open aero channels meant that plenty of unsightly splatter and even loose stones had already started to accumulate, and that plus the complimentary Swissvax stuff I'd taken Christmas collection of was more than enough to justify a good going over. But when it comes to hot cars and posh cleaning products like these, there's really no justification needed. Now, while it's easy to get a bit giddy in the presence of one of the most capable cars in the world, it does pay to think things through before getting hands-on, as treating something like this in the same manner you would a Dacia Sandero could lead to dirt being left behind or even damage being done. So took a few simple precautionary measures here to keep things as safe as a thorough hands-on wash could realistically be. Starting with blocking off the bonnet vents with a couple of drying towels, as while a freshly built German gubbins below will almost certainly be water, weather and suds proof. Just didn't seem right dumping a load of it down there if I didn't have to, so closed the carbon bonnet up with the towels underneath it to create a temporary absorbent microfibre barrier. I then needed to deal with the array of loose and abrasive stones found inside the plastic fins, vents and intakes, which unfortunately looked like they had already left their mark in places, and while a pressure rinse certainly would have got rid of them, would have also likely dinged them at high speed into and over other parts of the car where they could potentially do further damage, so decided to take a more laborious but hopefully less impactful approach. First with a handheld vac to gently suck up a couple of stray and trapped stones that spraying with water would have only driven deeper. Then with a handheld pressure foamer, which was used to blanket the affected areas over in targeted fashion, prior to them being sloshed out with a showery stream of hose water. The thinking behind this approach was that the foam would help to encapsulate the loose stones while the water would serve to lubricate their relatively gentle removal, which I think overall worked quite well. Yes, compared to a quick and precise pressure washer, snow foam and rinse, which I would still be doing, it was a bit of a faff, but it still served to leave no stone unturned, which was the main aim of tackling this unmistakably third world problem that unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, comes with owning a sticky tired supercar that churns up the tarmac more aggressively than a McLaren Senna. So with the loose gravel gone from the plastic parts, I then turned my attention to the 20-inch wheels and their corresponding cut-out arches, which were first pre-rinsed with the washer at about half pressure, as freshly installed PPF and lightly more loose stones lurking deeper within meant it just didn't feel right going in at full blast. But being a new motor, this proved to be more than enough pressure to knock back the vast majority of the superficial dirt from its circular surfaces. dedicated wheel cleaning kit came as part of the complimentary Swissvax bundle, but with these new wheels not needing a full detail, didn't really get to put all of it to use here, instead favouring the car bath shampoo that was primarily supplied for use on the body. But I did use the traditional brush to tickle over the main areas where dirt tends to accumulate, as well as a little bit of the Forte wheel spray just to try and quickly gauge its capability for cleaning more deeply ingrained wheels. And its thick, clingy formulation certainly smelt potent enough, so we'll have to try and put it to use on something more suitably dirty in a future video. Now, as you can probably imagine with a car like this, there isn't a great deal of space or tolerance for anything other than going fast, so adequately brushing over things like massive brake-filled wheel barrels and sticky tyre-filled wheel arches isn't the most straightforward of affairs, so just went through the motions as best I could for the sake of the video and for the sake of getting to know the car here, before thoroughly pressure rinsing everything off and out, which I suspect would have done the lion's share of the work on its own. It was then time to treat the RS's wide body to a light pre-wash, and while Swissvax don't have a dedicated snow foam in their lineup, I'd mixed a bit of their shampoo with some old snow foam from the spares and repairs cupboard, as I wasn't sure how the shampoo would foam up through a bottle by itself. And with the car being freshly ceramic coated, a pre-rinse alone would have likely removed the vast majority of dirt, but knew I couldn't go to the trouble of getting a car of this calibre on camera without capturing some satisfying shots of it soaking in suds, so went ahead and did just that with the hybrid concoction of shampooy snow foam, thoroughly rinsing off the aerodynamically sculpted exterior in as methodical manner as I could once it had had a good chance to soak, to hopefully remove the bulk of the unsightly winter splatter and any remaining loose gravel before committing to making physical contact. Swissvax had sent over a couple of their wash pads to help clean the Porsche up, so after dunking the regular one, which tickled my fancy a bit more than the fine fibred one in my wash bucket to load it with fresh car bath suds, got to work washing the 911's freshly PPF'd surfaces over from soft carbon roof to exposed plastic skirts. And while in all honesty there wasn't much cleaning to be done at this point, it was still nice to get hands on with a fat new RS and a quality shampoo product that, as far as I can remember, I've not used before. Now, although the microfibre pad was fine for washing over the more open and accessible parts of the car, I knew it would be difficult to properly get into the more intricate racy details with it. So once the main areas had been tended to, switched to a separate dedicated wash mitt for those, but it'd be nice to see Swissvax maybe release one of their own, as in my opinion nothing can realistically compete with the versatility, convenience and safety of a decent wash mitt. And once you've become accustomed to using them, it's hard to comfortably go back to anything else. While I didn't really have to worry about suds drying on the surface here as it was cold, damp and dark, I did have to consider the fact the car had recently had paint protection film installed, as while assuming it's been done properly, you should be able to wash things over in the normal manner. In my experience, it still makes sense, at least for the first few washes, to try not to excessively scrub over its edges if possible, as it's an expensive and laborious undertaking, and the last thing you want is to contribute to it lifting prematurely. So while this can add to the faff and stress factor of washing a car like this, considering its value, the fact this one lives outside exposed to the elements and the stony roads it will be used on, PPF was an absolute must. So once the panels had been sufficiently washed over, the car was then treated to one last rinse to remove the Swissvax suds and any remaining superficial dirt that may have been knocking about within them, which, much like the methodical pre-rinse, was about ensuring each surface and aerodynamic nook and cranny saw a good going over with the semi-pressurised stream of water, which I think at this stage would be safe to say was a pretty self-explanatory affair. And when I kept it handheld with the stubby gun throughout here, could have saved myself from a bit of wintry splashback by having the lance coupled instead, which is something to consider if you're working outside in the cold all day. Swissvax had kindly included one of their machine washable ultra dry twist loop towels, but I decided to take advantage of the fact the RS was ceramic coated and blow dry the vast majority of it off with my big Bruhl twin turbine beast instead, which, being an aero car, I thought was quite apt to not only quickly get rid of the standing rinse water from the slick protected surfaces, but also force it out from the numerous performance oriented cracks and crevices, which trying to tease out with a towel alone would have been a ball ache. But I don't use this thing anywhere near as much as I should on camera, so was happy to go ahead and hairdry the whole car off here, including the wheels, irrespective of the racket using machines over surfaces like these can make. Now, unfortunately, blow drying won't remove every last drop of rinse water, at least not in this kind of wintry weather, so I did still go ahead and work the Swissvax towel over and around some of the more awkward parts that tend to hold on to and leak water. Plus, it was a good excuse to get my hands on the car again and secretly pretend it was my own for a short while. And while size-wise, the ultra-dry towel likely wouldn't have been able to fully dry the car off by itself, was just a ticket for finishing things up here. So although the car didn't realistically need any more than a wash, Swissvax had sent me a fair few bottles of plonk over the festive period, so with a couple more hours of daylight left, thought it was only right I work through them, starting with their Nano Express quick refinisher. Designed to boost the gloss and shine of previously protected cars, it was perfect for use on this one, and after being mostly directly applied, was simply spread over the surface with a soft foam applicator pad every which way, before being buffed off with ease once it had been pretty much straight away, using one of the supplied yellow short fibre towels, which were more PPF friendly than plush linty ones, which can potentially deposit dry fibres along any compromised edges. While I'm not a fan of fiddly mini triggers, this one actually helped to keep the application process relatively neat and tidy. And while less is generally more, when it comes to complementary stuff I haven't used before, rightly or wrongly, I like to apply a bit more than is probably necessary, so that I can get a good feel for it on the surface, which I don't think you can truly do when being stingily stringent. But either way, it was nice to use something substantive that looked and felt like it was having a real moisturising effect on the surface, rather than a clear liquid that's difficult to discern. And that, plus the fact it can be used to enhance pretty much all exterior surfaces, including racy stickers, means that as long as you're not too concerned about adding layers of durable protection and are just looking to keep things sharp in between more in-depth detail sessions, then would definitely recommend giving this stuff a go. It was then onto the exposed exterior plastics, of which modern 911s and specifically GT3s sport a fair bit of. But before conditioning them, thought I'd go ahead and treat them to a dedicated clean with some of Swissvax's plastic wash product. So after spritzing it directly over the surface, thoroughly wiped them down with a general purpose towel, as I wanted to save the last Swissvax branded one I had for the subsequent stage. And while I'm guessing by the fresh scent and the fact this stuff isn't cheap, it will probably be best reserved for more targeted interior use, I wasn't tending to the inside of this car here and figured stripping back the exterior plastics, which as I say there was certainly enough of, wouldn't do any harm, especially considering how they looked at the start of the day. So worked my way around the various exposed bits and bobs with the deep cleaning product, which can also be scrubbed into the grain of plastic trim with a Swissvax brush if necessary, to ensure it was all as clean as it possibly could be before subtly enhancing it. With all of the exterior plastic trim de-stoned, pre-cleaned, contact washed and stripped back, it only made sense to follow up with a final enhancement, and while I had two dedicated plastic conditioning products from Swissvax here, decided to go with the regular one for this exterior stuff, as I reckon the other matte finish formulation will probably be best suited for interior trim where sheen generally isn't desirable. So after applying some of the milky fluid onto a fresh sponge applicator pad, thoroughly spread it over the surface before levelling out and eliminating any excess with a towel to hopefully leave a slightly better than factory finish. Again, I was probably applying a bit too much of the product here, but being water based, any excess can easily be mopped up. Although I think the idea is that if you're applying the right amount, you shouldn't really need to wipe over with a towel, instead relying on the sponge to simultaneously apply and finesse it instead. But either way, I cracked on in the cold until I felt everywhere had been adequately treated. And while I expected a bit more of a sheen from this non-matte version, looking back, the subtle enhancement it left behind probably suited the Porsche plastics perfectly. So with the non-existent sun now not far off setting, quickly moved on to giving the unprotected glass a once over with some of Swissvax's bright blue crystal product, which after being healthily spritzed over the surface was worked in with a couple of the recommended thin papery feeling cloths, which I'll admit isn't what I'm used to, but being lint free seemed to do the job. Then before I could fully finish up with the cleaning shots was rudely interrupted by the camera telling me its memory cards had reached capacity, so I had no choice but to call it a day there, which to be fair, with aftershots still yet to catch, was probably a blessing in disguise. Now, although I did pop back the following morning for a few final shots, this was never going to be the most luminescent of videos. But dismal January or not, it was still a new GT3RS, and you could clearly see how it looked following its Swiss soak and spritz compared to how it did at the start of the day, which was the most important thing. Now, I didn't get the opportunity to put all of the products I was sent over to use here, so we'll have to try and keep them handy for something else. But the stuff I did get to crack open seemed to work perfectly well. The question for you is, does that justify the expenses? Swissvax anything ain't cheap, but then to be fair, neither is a quality new 911 like this. Either way, I appreciate their generosity, and it's nice to know I'm on the radar of such a long established and well respected brand. Obviously, it was great to banish the January blues by getting to grips with a new GT3RS, so huge thanks to Roger Bailey for allowing me to do just that. Check out his channel, Roger Bailey on Cars, for more mostly Porsche related content, and make sure you subscribe while you're there so that you don't miss the stuff he plans to post with the new beast once it's been running. But that's it from me for this one, so as always, thanks for watching, happy newish year, and I'll see you in another one soon.